My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, a software engineer living in Dayton, Ohio. My life began in a three-bedroom house on Willow Creek Road, a place I never truly felt I belonged to. I was adopted at just 1 month old by Sebastian and Avery, a middle-class couple, modest, but kind in the way that neighbors admired. They had two biological children after me, Jacob and Layla, 2 and 4 years younger than me, respectively. But at every meal, every family gathering, I was never called daughter. I was Claire, I was her, I was the lucky child rescued from a life of uncertainty. They didn't beat me, didn't abuse me, just a kind of cold indifference, as if all the affection had been reserved for their biological children, and I was a duty project to be completed. I knew how to wash dishes, did tidy work with hands that didn't seem to belong to a 6-year-old. When I went to school, I brought home A's. When my adoptive mother looked tired, I made her bed for her. But the reward was always a vague nod or a phrase like, "All right," never a hug. Once my adoptive mother looked down at me and said, "You should be grateful. This family saved you from a worthless life." I didn't cry then. I just went straight to my room, opened my workbook, and copied today's math exercises, as if numbers could erase that silent wound. The only person who made me feel like I existed was Grandma Eleanor, Sebastian's mother, who lived on a farm 3 hours' drive from Ohio. Every long holiday I asked to stay with her. She called me my little girl, taught me how to bake apple pie, plant potatoes, and play the sonatine on the old piano in the living room. Once I asked, "Why don't Mom and Dad love me?" She placed a hand on my shoulder and gently said, "Because they don't understand how much you're worth." I asked, "Then does my birth mother understand?" She was silent for a long time and then simply said, "There are things time will reveal." That answer stayed with me for many years afterward, as I grew up in a house colder than an Ohio winter, where Jacob called me the stray, and Layla treated me with the indifference reserved for housemaids, not older sisters. I once made a birthday gift for 7-year-old Layla, a bracelet I knotted myself with yarn and beads, but she threw it in the trash without a glance. At 15, I used my first paycheck from a part-time job to buy Jacob a gaming console, thinking it would make him like me more. But instead, I got scolded by my mother for spoiling her son, even though Jacob often skipped school to play games with friends. Those wounds didn't bleed, but they sank deep and taught me to hide emotions behind my eyes. At 18, I received a full scholarship to study computer science at the University of Michigan. That was when I packed my bags and left that house. No tears, no hugs, just a polite farewell from my adoptive mother and a limp handshake from my father. I boarded the train with an old suitcase, an even older laptop, and a faint hope that somewhere out there I'd find a place to call home. College life was the first time I felt free, but also the first time I knew what it meant to be completely alone. The University of Michigan was vast, full of friend groups, laughter echoing down dormitory hallways, weekend dinner parties I was never invited to. I spent most of my time in the library, working as a teaching assistant for a professor in artificial intelligence, and taking on freelance coding jobs to cover living expenses. I lived in a small rented room with a window overlooking the football field, where the cheers of students felt like they came from another world. But I liked that space, where I didn't have to guess whether someone's eyes held contempt. I still sent letters home every holiday, including a transcript full of near-perfect grades, hoping some small part of my adoptive mother might feel proud. The only responses I received were brief text messages like, "Good, stay healthy." I wasn't angry anymore. I just learned to lower my expectations so it wouldn't hurt as much. Each long break, I didn't return to the old house, but took the bus to Grandma Eleanor's lakeside farm. Still the smell of warm apple pie, the wind rustling through wooden windows, and her silhouette embroidering cloth by the window. We didn't speak much, but I always felt seen. During winter break of my junior year, while baking, I asked her again, Is it true? My birth mother doesn't even know I'm still alive? Grandma Eleanor looked at me for a long time, her clouded eyes glinting with something both tender and sorrowful. She replied softly, "Every mother carries a scar when parting from the child she gave birth to. The answer doesn't lie in intention, but in circumstance. But time will show you." I didn't ask further. I just remembered that gaze and began to hope silently that someday I would find the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that I wasn't the only one hoping to be found. I graduated with honors, stood on the stage with hundreds of other students to receive my diploma, but there was only one person in the audience who made me feel truly seen: Grandma Eleanor. She wore her old brown coat, holding a bouquet of carnations I once mentioned were my favorite, and when I hugged her, she whispered, "I'm proud of you. Not for the grades, but because you never let others' indifference kill your heart." I couldn't say anything, just nodded and hugged her tightly. After graduation, I returned to Ohio, not to the old house, but to a small apartment in downtown Dayton, and started working for a mid-sized tech company. They called me Claire AI for my speed in handling algorithms and how I always found solutions to the toughest problems. In my colleagues' eyes, I was smart, cold, independent, but no one knew that every night I came home, cooked a simple meal, and ate alone under the soft yellow light as a way to soothe the feeling of never having truly belonged to anyone. My adoptive parents occasionally texted when they needed money: a broken appliance, tutoring fees for Jacob, an investment loan for Layla. I sent it all expecting no thanks, thinking maybe, just maybe, consistent kindness might change the way they saw me. But the only response I ever got remained cold and fragmented. I was still not called daughter, still not invited to important family occasions. Once I accidentally saw a photo on social media of the whole family on a picnic, everyone smiling brightly, and I hadn't even known the trip existed. I thought I had grown used to the feeling of being left behind, but some pains, no matter how old, still sting when touched. One night, after completing a major project, I sat alone by the window, looking at the dim lights in the apartments across the street. In that moment, I asked myself, is there someone out there in the world waiting for me? Someone who once held me as a newborn, has thought about me all these years. And that question, quiet but persistent, began to open a path in my heart, leading me toward truths never spoken in this family. When I got hired by a top tech company headquartered in Ohio 3 years after graduation, it wasn't just a career milestone. It was the first time I thought about sharing that joy with my adoptive family. I chose an elegant, European-style restaurant in downtown Dayton, made a reservation a week in advance, and prepared handwritten invitations with personal notes for each person: my adoptive father, mother, Jacob, Layla, and a separate one for Grandma Eleanor, the one person I knew for sure would come. I called each of them to confirm, received a few vague responses like, "We'll see," or "maybe," but I still held out hope. I picked a light blue dress, simple but graceful, did my makeup subtly, and told myself tonight would be different. Tonight could be a new beginning. I arrived 15 minutes early, sat down, ordered water and wine, and kept glancing toward the entrance every time someone walked in. 7 o'clock came, then 7:30. I was still alone. At 8, I received a text from my adoptive mother, Avery. "The family decided to eat at home. We're cutting carbs. Enjoy your evening." No apology, no explanation. Just the same cold indifference that had lingered for years. I read the message 3 times, the first time in shock, the second in pain, the third fell into me like a bottomless void. I sat still, didn't cry. Just lowered my head onto the table, hand still gripping the glass as if clinging to the last shred of self-respect. A waiter came and asked if I'd like to order. I nodded, asked for a meal for one: lasagna and a slice of almond cake. In my heart there was only one question: what did I do wrong? But then, as dessert was being served, a familiar figure stepped into the restaurant. Grandma Eleanor. She wore a gray wool coat, her head bowed slightly against the cold wind, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a thin rope. When she saw me, her eyes lit with a gentle sorrow, as if she already knew everything. She didn't say a word, just pulled out a chair beside me and quietly placed her hand on mine. And in that moment, when everyone I had tried to reach out to was absent, the one person who had never turned her back on me was there. Her presence, quiet and sincere, felt like a thread stitching back the tears I hadn't known I still carried. I didn't need to say anything, and she didn't need to ask. We shared a meal. The room felt warmer, the cake sweeter, and for the first time that evening, my heart no longer felt empty. After dinner that night, Grandma Eleanor didn't go home immediately. She said she wanted to stop by my apartment. There was something important she needed to tell me. On the way back, she was silent. So was I. But it wasn't a tense silence, just one of waiting. When we stepped into my small apartment, she slowly took off her coat, sat on the sofa, and placed her handbag on her lap. I made 2 cups of peppermint tea, then sat across from her. The lamplight cast a soft glow on her face, older than I remembered. She let out a deep sigh, then rummaged through her bag and pulled out a thick envelope, tied with a faded beige ribbon. She handed it to me. "Before you open this, there's something I need to say," she said, looking straight at me as if to make sure I was strong enough. "Claire, you didn't come to Sebastian and Avery's family by chance. I was the one who brought you to them." I froze. Her words cracked something deep inside me like a sudden fracture in a still lake. She told me that nearly 30 years ago she had worked as a housemaid and nanny for a wealthy family in San Antonio, Texas. That family had a daughter named Abigail, intelligent, proud, and always dreaming of a life free from the control of wealth and reputation. At 20, Abigail fell in love with a poor software engineer who worked part-time at a university library. The relationship was met with fierce disapproval, and when she got pregnant, her family saw it as an unforgivable disgrace. They cast her out. Grandma Eleanor was the only one who didn't turn away. She took Abigail into her small apartment, cared for her through the pregnancy. And when Abigail gave birth to me, Grandma Eleanor was the one who delivered me. "You were a healthy baby, big eyes, thick black hair just like Abigail," she said, her voice slow, like recalling something sacred. But just a few weeks later, Abigail, a panicked girl with no home, no job, decided to give me to Grandma Eleanor so she could return to school and rebuild her life. At first, Grandma wanted to raise me as her own granddaughter. But her son Sebastian, who had been married for 10 years without children, expressed a desire to adopt. She convinced him and Avery to take me in, on the condition that they love me as their own. At first, they agreed, but 2 years later, Layla was born, then Jacob. And from that point on, I became a shadow, a surplus in the very family that was meant to be my refuge. Grandma Eleanor wiped her tears with a handkerchief and handed me the envelope. Inside are letters from your birth mother, Abigail Anderson. There are photos of her, and her business card. She never stopped looking for you. But she waited until she was strong enough, worthy enough, so that you would never have to live in need again. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. A photo of a woman standing in front of a glass building. Dark hair, a smile eerily familiar. A handwritten letter, nearly 3 pages long, in a soft cursive I had never seen, but felt as if it had touched me long ago. At the bottom was a business card. Abigail Anderson, founder and CEO, Clarion Systems, San Antonio, Texas. Grandma Eleanor placed her hand over mine. "You have the right to know the truth. But I only hope you won't let the past destroy who you've become." I didn't know what to say. It felt like my whole life, the nameless pieces, the unanswered questions, had suddenly aligned. But at the same time, I was afraid. Afraid that if I met her, I'd have to confront the question that had haunted my childhood. Why did you leave me? And what I feared most was that the answer might not be what I had hoped for. I sat silently on the sofa, my heart swollen with questions I hadn't yet dared to speak. In front of me was the long handwritten letter. Beside it, the photo of a woman whose eyes looked so much like mine, resilient, yet hiding a fragile tenderness. I hadn't opened the letter, not yet. I wasn't ready. Grandma Eleanor understood. She set down her teacup, pulled a light blanket over my legs, and began to speak, as if she had waited nearly 30 years just to say these words. Abigail was a special girl, she began, her eyes gazing out the window, where the first snow of the season was falling quietly onto the rooftops. Born into a prestigious family in San Antonio, where everything was predetermined, the school she'd attend, the person she'd marry, the life she was supposed to live by the standards of a proper lady. But Abigail was different. She loved programming, loved technology. She learned to code at 13 and by 16 had earned a scholarship to a renowned technical school. She paused for a moment, pouring more water into her cold tea. Then she met your father, a regular college student, working part-time at the library, where she interned that summer. They fell in love, secretly dated for a year. When her family found out she was pregnant, they exploded. No marriage, no baby. They demanded she have an abortion, but Abigail refused. She ran away from home, came to stay with me. I was still working as their maid at the time. She stayed throughout the pregnancy, studied online, worked on small software projects to get by. As I listened, I felt something tightening around my chest. I had never imagined my birth mother to be like that. Not weak, not a runaway, but someone who had defied an entire dynasty to keep me. When you were born, Grandma Eleanor continued, she cried so much, not from pain, but because she knew she couldn't give you a good life. She held you, kissed your forehead, and said to me, I can't keep her, but I'll come back for her when I'm strong enough so she'll never have to suffer shame again. And she left with a backpack, an old laptop, and a resolve never to return to that house. I asked softly, as if afraid to break the memory. Then, what happened next? Grandma Eleanor smiled, a proud smile, as if speaking of her own daughter. Abigail started from nothing, worked as a tech assistant at a small computer repair shop, coded freelance at night for small companies in Austin. After 4 years, she founded her own company, a startup called Clarion Systems. That company now has over 300 employees, offices in 3 states, and Abigail is its CEO. She never stopped searching for you. But she didn't want to appear while you were still dependent on your adoptive family. She was afraid of disrupting your life. I looked again at the business card in my hand, feeling as though I was holding a long-lost piece of my life. Abigail Anderson, the woman I once believed had abandoned me out of selfishness, had in fact lived 28 years waiting to be worthy of being my mother. Now that you're grown, strong, Grandma said softly, her gaze full of hope, I think maybe it's time you meet her. I clenched the letter in my hand, heart swelling with emotion, trembling with unnamed fear. Not fear that she wouldn't love me, but fear that I wouldn't know whether to forgive or to resent the woman who brought me into this world, then left. And yet, amid the chaos in my heart, one thing became clearer than ever. I was no longer alone in my story. And perhaps it was time to take one step toward the truth, to find the answers for all the years of feeling lost. I stayed awake the entire night after that evening. The letter still lay on the table, unopened. I paced back and forth in my small apartment, my heart filled with questions that had no answers. If my birth mother had really been searching for me for over 20 years, why didn't she come sooner? If she was strong enough to build an entire company, why wasn't she strong enough to keep me? But then I wondered, Was it because I'd grown used to living in the shadows of rejection that I could no longer trust in genuine light? As dawn neared, I picked up the letter. I didn't open it like someone searching for love, but like someone searching for truth. Her handwriting was soft, neat, and quiet, like a long whisper that had trailed through my childhood but never reached me. In the letter, she wrote that my name, Claire, was the name she had wanted to give me from the beginning. That when she left Grandma Eleanor's apartment, the only thing she took with her was a small piece of paper with the words, "Claire, little light," written on it. She wrote about nights she worked to exhaustion, only to fall asleep dreaming of the child she'd never had a chance to speak to. She told me she once stood across the street when I graduated from high school, too afraid to approach because she knew she had no right, and that when her company finally turned a profit, the first thing she did wasn't buy a house, but hire a private investigator to quietly check if I was living okay. The last lines of the letter were an apology, not flowery, not tragic. Just simply, "I'm sorry for letting you grow up in loneliness, but if you agree to meet me, I will never let you walk alone again." I sat in silence for a long time. I didn't cry. I only felt a light mist lifting from my heart. After a winter that had lasted 28 years. I called Grandma Eleanor. She picked up immediately, as if she had been waiting. "I'm going to San Antonio," I said. "I don't know what I'll find, but I think I need to go." She wasn't surprised. She just said, "I'll go with you." And so, a week later, I booked a plane ticket. At first, I didn't tell anyone in my adoptive family, not out of anger, but because I no longer sought permission from those who had never offered me a choice. But 2 days before the flight, I decided to tell my parents about the plan. I returned to the old house on a Saturday afternoon. The sky was overcast, as if even the heavens weren't ready for this reunion. Grandma Eleanor sat beside me in the car, her hand resting gently on my thigh like an invisible support. When we stopped in front of the house where I'd spent the first 18 years of my life, I looked up at the second-floor window. My old room, where I learned to do my own laundry at 10, where I taught myself programming at 14, and learned to cry silently at 16. Grandma Eleanor said, "If you don't speak today, you'll carry this burden for the rest of your life." I nodded and stepped out of the car. My adoptive mother, Avery, opened the door. She seemed surprised, but quickly regained her usual composure. "Claire, is something wrong?" I invited her to sit in the living room, the same place I used to sit and listen to family stories during dinner, yet never once heard my name. My adoptive father, Sebastian, emerged from his office, settling into the armchair like a theater spectator, while Jacob and Layla were absent. Perhaps no one had called them. I took a copy of Abigail's letter, a business card, and a photo from my bag. I didn't hand them over, just placed them gently on the table like a symbol. "I didn't come here to argue," I began. "I just want to say that for years, I tried so hard to be acknowledged. I sent money, letters, did everything well hoping to receive a little warmth, even just a birthday wish. But today, I no longer need that." Avery frowned, her voice cold. "And what? You found your birth mother and now everything changes?" "She abandoned you." I looked her straight in the eyes, for the first time, without flinching. Nothing changes. But I have changed. I no longer need anyone in this house to define who I am. No need for permission, no need for pity. I came here only to say that from today on, I am no longer the child standing behind the kitchen door, listening to everyone laugh but too afraid to step out. Grandma Eleanor stood up, her voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. "Claire lived rightly, and you all never saw it." No one spoke. The room fell into an eerie silence, not awkward, but the unsettled quiet of people realizing something they lost would never return. I left the house without looking back. Grandma Eleanor walked beside me, hand in hand. The wind bit cold against my face, but inside I felt warm. Not because they had changed, but because I no longer needed them to change for me to feel worthy. Our flight to San Antonio departed at 6 a.m. It was still pitch dark when Grandma Eleanor and I wheeled our suitcases into the airport. She sat next to me on the plane, gripping my hand the entire trip, as if she knew a part of the past was about to be unearthed, and I needed someone to anchor me. As the plane descended, the early sunlight bathed the hills in gold. San Antonio smelled of sun, dry earth, and carried a strange warmth of a place I'd never been to, yet somehow felt like I belonged. I wore a simple white shirt, dark jeans, no makeup. I just wanted to be myself. We arranged to meet at a small bakery near the entrance of the San Antonio Zoo, where giant oak trees cast wide shadows, and the staff wore beige aprons with apple pie prints. I arrived 10 minutes early, heart beating light but fast, filled with a strange sensation, not nervousness, not fear, but a longing so prolonged I could hardly believe it was truly happening. Then, she walked in. Abigail. Long, neat dark hair, a slender face with deep brown eyes that glowed with remorse and tenderness she couldn't hide. She looked at me for a long second, as if trying to memorize my face deep into her heart. Then, she stepped forward, unhurried, not crying, and softly said, "Claire?" I nodded. My throat tightened. And when she reached out her arms, I stepped into them. Not out of obligation, not because all my anger had vanished, but because something deeper than words was rising from within me. I had waited for this hug my whole life. She held me tightly, and for the first time, I heard her sob. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry for letting you grow up so alone." I didn't answer right away. I just let myself stay in her arms, like a child finally reclaiming the blanket that was once taken away. Grandma Eleanor stood behind us, eyes red but smiling. When the three of us sat down together, ordered spiced apple tea and cinnamon pastries, no one rushed to explain everything. We began with the smallest things: that I liked coding late at night, that Abigail had a cat named Miso, that Grandma Eleanor never liked coffee but always drank it when I visited. Pieces of our lives that once seemed unrelated slowly began fitting together into something soft, warm, and full of hope. And when I saw Abigail smile, a smile slightly like mine, I realized something. Some bonds don't need to be nurtured by time, but by love that never extinguished, even when divided by years and distance. That afternoon, Abigail took Grandma Eleanor and me to her home, a spacious lakeside house about a 20-minute drive from downtown San Antonio. It wasn't a flashy mansion or a showcase property, but a 9-bedroom brick house surrounded by lavender gardens and a straight line of maple trees. Next to the front door hung a hand-carved wooden plaque. "This is where we begin again." I stood still for a few seconds before that sign. There was something in those words that felt as if they were calling my name. Inside, the house breathed a rare warmth. Soft golden lighting, a faint smell of baked goods, and every detail arranged by a woman, both resilient and full of love. Abigail showed me my room, right by a balcony overlooking the lake, a spacious room with an oil painting of a forest hanging on the wall. On the desk was a brand new laptop, and beside it a photo frame, a picture of me as a baby, held in the arms of a woman. It was Grandma Eleanor. I turned and saw her standing on the porch, hand resting on the window frame as if whispering, "You've come home." That night, after a simple but delicious dinner, Abigail poured me a glass of red wine and began to speak. "Claire, my company, Clarion Systems, it's actually short for Claire On, meaning that little light never went out." I was stunned. I had always thought the name was just a random brand, but it turned out to be a reminder my mother had created, for me, not just one day, but across thousands of days apart. "I want to invite you to work with me," she said. "You can start at any position you'd like. No special treatment, no pressure." I looked at her. In her eyes there was no ambition, no forced expectation, only a deep wish to be part of my life if I allowed it. I thought for a moment and then nodded. I'll start as a computer science engineer, just like anyone else. I want to prove myself with my own effort. She smiled, full of pride. At that moment, Grandma Eleanor, who had been washing glasses in the kitchen, turned to look at us. Her eyes still held a hint of distance, as if she hadn't yet gotten used to being an official part of this picture. Abigail walked over, gently drying her hands with a kitchen towel, and said, not as a suggestion, but as something certain. Mom, I want you to move in here with Claire and me, not as a housekeeper, not as an outsider, but as our mother, our grandmother. The room went quiet for a few seconds. I saw Grandma Eleanor's hand pause at the sink, as if those words had gone straight to the deepest part of her, where, for so many years, she had only allowed herself to stand on the edge of belonging. She turned back, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm old, dear. I don't want to be a burden. Abigail stepped closer, took her hand, her gaze firm but gentle. You've taken care of both of us, one by one, since before either of us could stand on our own. Now it's our turn to need you here, not for apple pies or garden herbs, but because we need a mother, a grandmother, someone who makes this house truly a home. Grandma Eleanor looked at me. I simply smiled and nodded gently. In that moment, she seemed torn, between a life of solitude and the invitation to something she had never fully received, belonging. Then she let out a soft sigh, as if releasing a burden she had carried too long. Then, I'll replant the potato garden, she said, lips curling slightly. But this time, not to sell, just to cook for the family. And as she returned to the kitchen, her trembling hands drying the glasses as if they were the first evidence of a new life, one where she no longer stood at the edges of the story. That night, lying on a new bed, staring at the white ceiling and listening to the wind rustle the curtains, I no longer felt like someone trying to belong. I felt I was exactly where I needed to be, not because of bloodlines, but because, finally, someone saw me as a whole human being. I began working at Clarion Systems on a Monday morning, not as the CEO's daughter, but simply as a new software engineer on the core AI team, which developed machine learning tools for healthcare and cybersecurity. I had a plain desk, a designated mentor, and a list of tasks assigned through the internal system just like everyone else. My coworkers didn't know I was Abigail's daughter, or maybe some did, but no one mentioned it. That made it easier to breathe. Every day, I drove past tree-lined streets, listened to podcasts on the radio, and hand-brewed coffee at the office. Those small things meant a great deal to me. They signified a new life, where I didn't need to prove my worth through sacrifice, only through competence and self-respect. In the evenings, I had dinner with Abigail in the open kitchen, talking about daily projects or Miso, the cat's laziness. Grandma Eleanor usually sat by the window, knitting or rewriting old baking recipes, sometimes chiming in with a gentle joke. Once, when I was struggling with a natural language processing algorithm, Abigail sat beside me, not to teach, but to ask like a true colleague. If you were the end user, what would you want this tool to do first? In moments like that, I didn't just learn more about engineering, I learned how a mother could guide without controlling. One weekday evening, after work, I opened my phone to check messages. A familiar name appeared on the screen. Mom. Avery. The message was brief. Can you send me some money? Jacob lost his job. I got scammed on an investment. Things are tough now. Hope you understand. No inquiry about my life. Not a word about how I was doing. Just a request, like every time before. I sat quietly on the balcony, golden sunset casting light on the wooden table, the wind brushing softly through the budding lavender. I handed the phone to Grandma Eleanor, saying nothing. She read it, then placed the phone down and gently squeezed my shoulder. You don't have to answer right away, she said. But this time, you have the right to set a boundary. I wasn't angry at Avery. I no longer hoped for change, but I also wasn't ready to give unconditionally anymore. I opened my banking app and transferred a small amount, just enough to cover basic needs, then replied with one simple message. I hope you and Jacob get through this soon. But I'm building a new life now and can't continue supporting as before. I hope you understand. For the first time, I wrote a message not out of fear of offending, not to prove I was overly kind, but because I knew, sometimes, setting a boundary is how we protect goodness from being exploited. I turned off my phone and returned to the dinner table, where Abigail was preparing white bean soup, and Grandma Eleanor had just placed a tray of apple cookies in the oven. The kitchen was filled with the scent of cinnamon and honey, soft lighting casting a warm mist from the ceiling. I sat down, and for the first time in many years, felt entirely at peace with my choice. The celebration marking my official appointment as CEO of Clarion Systems took place on a late spring afternoon, 5 years after the day I met my birth mother. At age 52, Abigail decided to fully retire after nearly 2 decades of building the company from nothing but sheer will and a heart that never gave up. "You take it from here," she said in a quiet internal meeting, her eyes light as if laying down a burden she had carried through her youth. I nodded, not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I was ready to step out of my own shadow to carry on a dream passed down through love. The gathering wasn't large, only about 20 close people. Trusted colleagues, new friends from San Antonio, Grandma Eleanor in the cream cardigan she had knitted last winter, and Abigail in a deep blue dress with a silver brooch. We set up tables in the backyard, where the lake breeze drifted gently and lavender bloomed in small purple bushes. Apple cookies were placed at the center of the table, next to trays of red wine and tiny jars of candlelight for when the sky turned dark. In the moment of raising a toast, I looked around. No Jacob, no Layla, no Avery. But I didn't feel empty. I felt whole. Because for the first time, the people around me didn't need me to be worthy of love. They loved me for who I was. After the party, when night had fallen, I returned to the small office tucked in the corner of the second floor, took out a sheet of paper and a black ink pen. I wrote a letter, not emailed, not posted on social media, just a handwritten letter, sent to the old house in Dayton, where I once grew up, but no longer belonged. To Dad, Mom, Jacob, and Layla. Thank you for raising me. Because of those years, I learned how to be patient, how to stay silent without disappearing, and how to stand without being lifted. But I also learned that certain emotional voids should not be filled with blind sacrifice. Today, I don't write to blame or demand anything. I just want to say, I've found where I belong. Not because it's perfect, but because there I'm seen and heard as a whole human being. I hope each of you also finds a place like that. I placed the letter in an envelope, without addressing it to anyone in particular. Just wrote, Claire, today. As a reminder that the past no longer holds power, but is merely a part of the path I've walked. That night, I sat out on the balcony beside Grandma Eleanor and Abigail. We didn't speak much. We simply sat, listening to the sound of night insects, the rustle of maple leaves in the wind, and the steady breathing of 3 women, 3 generations, who had once been broken in 3 different ways, and were now rewriting the meaning of family together. And I knew, from that moment on, I would never have to walk alone again.